Alright. This is serious.
Whilst the Signals update has only just released for Space Engineers, Keen Software House, the developers of the game, were very, one could say, keen to talk about the next update after that. Over the past year or so, the developers have been teasing a combo of updates that focus on survival, exploration, encounters, and the PvE experience. So, let's take a look at everything that has been shown to us so far. The next update has been teased as a survival, exploration, encounters, and PvE update at lots of separate points, so it's hard to say whether all this refers to one update or several updates that we'll be receiving in the future. The developers have said that every single update from Warfare 2 onwards has been building to this next update, so now that we have buildable AI ships, lots of fancy new weapons, and the ability for grids to communicate in text chat, it's probably pretty safe to say what's coming next. Marek Grosser, the CEO of Keen Software House, writes a blog post about each update for Space Engineers when it comes out. At the bottom of the post about the Signals update...
Okay. So, what we have here is just a idea for something that they're proposing, which is based on the assumption here, some form of assembler, as you'll see later, but conveyor port there, conveyor port there. I'm assuming that that this is at least anywhere from 2 to 4 blocks wide, or possibly, well, it's 2 blocks high, if we can judge by the size of the conveyor port, and if it's 2 blocks high, then it's at least 3 blocks wide, judging by the conveyor port up here. So it's a 2 by 2 by 3, or 2 by 2 by 6 in total. Technically 2 by 2 by 2 by 2 by 3 sized block. If it's an assembler, then we can assume that it has at least 1, 2, 3 assembler ports in the back, and potentially 1 on the bottom, or 1 on this side here, since it is a 2 by 2 block. Which wouldn't be that bad. It'd be slightly better than the industrial assembler, but also slightly worse at the same... I mean, they could also put the attachment point down here at the bottom, or even under this conveyor port. It's kind of hard to tell. So you could have 3 on the back and then... Well, honestly, like I says, it'd probably be... I mean, you might only have 2 on the back and then 2 underneath, depending on how they have everything set up. That's if this is an assembler, which it appears to be. As you can guess by these little mechanical arms here in the conveyor belt. Could be a refinery, like a new micro-refinery.
He wrote this. What's next? We have so much more to explore. In the next update, 1.205, we're going to go big. New resources, new endgame blocks. We take a deep dive into PvE encounters, and we begin exploring exploration. Below this post, there is an image of a mysterious new block that we'll be looking at in a minute. This isn't the only tease we've got about this future update, as Keen Software House's newsletter also contained this teaser here. And additionally, there have also been a couple of teasers on their live streams as well. We'll use Marek's teaser to guide us between these other teasers, as there's a lot of overlap between them, this future update, as Keen Software House is...
Now, when you look at this monstrosity here, all I can think of is Ectosage's Titan engine. This is like a modernized version of the Titan engine. This block is going to be either 3x3. It's going to be the first 3x3 ion engine that we have. But it's going to be at least, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. It's going to be about 9 blocks long, because each block is roughly the size of one person on a large grid. So it's about 3 blocks tall. Well, if we factor in the fact that this is roughly the same height as him, so that's 1 block, 2 blocks, 3 blocks. So it'd be 3 by 3. Then we can assume that this part is probably about 1 to 2 blocks, or maybe 1.5 blocks in length. So then it's just this massive back part here. Overall, this would be perfect for your large grid battleships like my Revangelist or Zillifer class Star Destroyers. And honestly, I'm really, really hoping they do introduce this, because I have the space for them. I have a lot of space on those ships.
Newsletter also contained this teaser here. And additionally, there have also been a couple of teasers on their live streams as well. We'll use Marek's teaser to guide us between these other teasers, as there's a lot of overlap between them, and we'll start with...
Listen, paying $14.99 a month for a streaming app, and $9.99 a month for a music app, and $12.99 for a fitness...
The word new resources has always been a scary idea for me. Adding too many resources to the game could, in my opinion, make the game overly complicated, especially for new players, and it could potentially have the effect of making progressing through the game more of a chore than it was fun. However, it seems from the teasers this won't be the case. On the newsletter teaser, it says this: "We found a mysterious message in a datapad. What is a Prototech panel? A new block? What is going on? And who is redacted?" And there is also this screenshot below of information being looked at on a data.
We received a distress call from a nearby asteroid, part of the cluster colloquially referred to as the Pebbles. As I was unable to spot anything from the deck, I ordered a ground to approach via jetpack. The crew, upon reaching an unnamed asteroid, reported visuals on 2 Prototech panels, as well as a fully operational item redacted. Further investigation revealed no leads to pursue. There were no signs of shipwreck, no hint of who relayed the distress call, and, perhaps more distressingly, no presence of name redacted at all. Now, this can actually mean something interesting here. I mean, if we assume that the Prototech panels may be the equivalency of, like, really, really advanced solar panels, dead guy back there, and the fully operational item redacted is the massive thruster, then part of your exploration would basically be hunting this stuff down, grinding it down, adding it to your blueprints, and then basically going around collecting all this stuff so that you can build better and better stuff with it.
Datapad in game. It says, "On Tuesday morning at 7:12 UTC, we received a distress call from a nearby asteroid, part of a cluster colloquially referred to as the Pebbles. As I was unable to spot anything from deck, I ordered a ground crew to approach via jetpack. The crew, upon reaching an unarmed asteroid, reported visuals on 2 Prototech panels, as well as a fully operational item redacted. Further information revealed no leads to pursue. There were no signs of a shipwreck, no hint to who relayed the distress call, and perhaps, most distressingly, no presence of name redacted at all. This unfortunately only raises more questions." During the space...
Now, another thing the Prototech panels could refer to is a new special class of armor stronger than heavy armor. Because as you know, currently heavy armor can only block the equivalency of... It takes roughly 8 layers of heavy armor to stop the artillery cannon when it hits, and even more than that to stop the railgun. So Prototech panels may be a new way of armoring your ship with even more powerful armor than heavy armor.
Space Engineers developer live streams, the developers mentioned that this new update will focus on something called prototech. But what is prototech? Proto means original or primitive, or first or earliest. So this likely means that this prototech is technology that belonged to whoever was in the Space Engineers star system before we were. Let's not forget that the main planet in Space Engineers is referred to as the Earth-like planet. And last I checked, Pertam and the alien planets do not exist in our solar system, so the solar system we explore in Space Engineers is not our own. Mars is there, but just don't worry about it. Fans of Mass Effect will know of the Protheans, an ancient race that built technology so advanced that thousands of years later, all of the races of the galaxy now use that technology as the basis for their own. Stargate also does this. I'm sure you've seen that the Egyptians were actually secret aliens, and the current season of Star Trek Discovery is also exploring this idea. Many different sci-fi properties have featured this idea in the past, and I assume this is what Space Engineers will be doing in its next update. An ancient race once lived in this solar system, and now we, the Space Engineers, are discovering their technology.
Well, there's one thing that he didn't mention, and this is pretty important. The monoliths and the stereoliths, which are evidence of a previous civilization that had been in the game since the beginning. These objects have been part of Space Engineers for pretty much since planets were introduced. So not the beginning, but I mean since planets. So this may be a continuation of the storyline, or potentially an introduction to a storyline featuring the stereolith and the protolith, giving you a reason to visit various planets to find these artifacts and potentially receive special blueprints from them, which I think would be a cool idea if they did it. I don't know if they're going to do it, but I think it would be a cool idea if they did. That would give you a reason to find these artifacts, potentially a way to find these artifacts, and in doing so, give you a reason to hunt them. They could even include more of them and newer types of them. And potentially leading you to more advanced technologies and PvE battles against other scavengers, or even against the original, or against remnant technologies of this proto-race to begin with. Personally, I think those would all be great things to add to the game. Whether they do it or not is up to debate.
And using it for ourselves. An ancient race once lived in the solar system. Where have I heard that before? The datapad in...
Okay, he doesn't specifically mention them. Now, I love the fact that basically as I go through here, I say the exact same thing he does, just a little bit earlier. I have watched the video, it's just, unfortunately, by the time I created this video, I've already forgotten most of the content.
The newsletter teaser refers to prototech panels. I assume these are one of two things. Either they're a new resource allowing the construction of more advanced blocks, or they are panels that show blueprints for these advanced new blocks.
I still go with the idea that these are either some type of new solar panel, or or it's a description of like an errant armor panel. Because we do have the armor panel blocks now. His ideas aren't bad. I mean, it makes just as much sense as anything else.
New blocks, you say? What makes you say that? Well, for starters, if you remember the quote on the datapad, as well as a fully operational item redacted, seems pretty telling to me. And we also have two pieces of concept art showing some of these...
Another thing that would be interesting here is you see the decorative items they added to this. That's completely new decoration designs. If we assume that some of these panelings are specially decorated, and link these two technologies together, then we can assume that this might be part of the new stuff you can find. And as representations of the ancient and or lost civilization. Whether they are a human civilization or not, still up to debate. It does seem like the technology is human-based, so maybe there's some form of ancient lost humans who colonized this area and then went extinct.
Advanced new blocks. Let's take a look at them.
I mean, where did the space pirates come from? What about the various merchant vessels and whatnot that occasionally pop in? When you really stop and think about it, there's a lot going on in the universe, specifically the Space Engineers universe, that we have yet to be introduced to or explained. We know it's happening, we just don't know why or where.
Them, shall we? In the top right of this concept art, we can see two words blurred out. If we use what we've learned so far, the first word here is definitely prototech. You can see that all of the letters here match up. The second also seems quite obvious as well, considering the design of the block. It's definitely some kind of assembler, and would you look at it, that word fits perfectly with the second word here. So that makes this the prototech assembler. Presumably, this is some sort of advanced assembler constructed using ancient technology. How the assembler will be different from the one we currently have is probably the most interesting thing though. Will it be faster? Will it be more efficient? Or will it be able to create new components that we haven't seen before?
Personally, I think it will be able to create more advanced components for the new blocks out of the new resources, because not only is it a bigger block, because this one right here is only 2x2, or is actually a 1x2, and that's a 2x2x3. This is a 2x1x2, or 2x1x2 block, and that's a 2x3x2. In terms of height.
I feel like the last one is unlikely, as that means all of these new prototech blocks would be gated behind gaining.
And yes, that actually makes sense, because they introduced the development system with the previous game concepts. Break something down, get the blueprint, and then create it. So it makes sense the prototech blocks would be gated the same way behind storyline acquisitions. If you're playing the storyline, where development is something that you have to do to begin with. So having the more advanced assembler be gated behind having to get the prototype or having to get the starting assembler, then having to get the industrial and regular edition assembler, then having the new assembler as a third block that you can build, technically a fourth if you count the industrial. Well, but since it and the regular one are the same, it doesn't really count. But having the new assembler as the block that you need for the next level of development makes perfect sense. That is actually exactly what you would expect to happen. The new, more advanced blocks, like the bigger engine, are going to require more advanced components. Those more advanced components will be locked behind the proto-assembler. The same way that the regular assembler cannot make all the things that the proto-assembler cannot make all the things that the regular assembler can do. And the survival kit cannot make all of the things that the proto-assembler can make. Each one makes the parts to build the next one up. So a proto-assembler having more advanced components is just continuing the line. There's nothing in that that's wrong with that, and saying it's gated behind that, well, yes. If you're playing through the storyline, then yes, it's going to be gated behind that. You're not going to get it right at the beginning. That makes no sense whatsoever. And whether you have to build it, capture it, or salvage it is going to be part of the storyline. So I don't really understand the complaint of it being gated being a bad thing.
Access to this one, but we'll have to wait and see. The second concept art shows what is definitely a thruster. If we zoom in on this blurred text, this first word is 100% prototech. And if we look at the rest of the words, I'm pretty confident in saying that these words are Large Ion Thruster Concept C. I don't think this means we're getting 3 different Prototech large ion thrusters, as if we go back to the assembler, you can see that they have Concept C is one of many designs they've come up with this thruster. One of my concerns with Space Engineers adding more advanced blocks is that they would just be better than the ones that are currently in the game. Currently there are 3 different types of thrusters in the game, and each of them serve their own niche. When you're building your ships, you have to think about what kind of purpose they serve. If a ship is only in space, you only need ion thrusters. If a ship is only on a planet, you only need atmospheric thrusters. And if you want a ship to fly in between, you not only have to build hydrogen thrusters, you have to also make sure that you have enough hydrogen to make the trip there and back. Adding more thrusters to the game, that is just the ion thruster, but twice as good, is not...
Well, again, this argument doesn't actually fit. A primary reason I say that is, when you think about the common ion thruster, a lot of people play with the tiered thruster system, where each thruster takes more and more advanced components, with the final version, I think, like, taking the gravity components or something, and a bunch of the regular components. So, in reality, just having a thruster that's better, like a 1x1 ion thruster that pumps out 4 times as much thrust, but requires you to have superconductor components in addition to everything else, isn't a bad thing if it requires more or rarer resources. And the Prototech resources could provide you with the justification to say, okay, this requires this extremely difficult and hard to get resource, so it justifies it producing 4 times as much thrust. It's not a senseless argument, it's just a system of progression. Now, if you were going to, say, build in freeform, then yeah, you're always going to pick that 1x1 thruster over the 2x1 thrusters, because why wouldn't you if it produces 4 times as much thrust? But when you're playing the actual campaign, you wouldn't have access to that thruster that's better right off the bat, because you would need to gather the resources to make it. That's kind of why I don't like this argument that making the thrusters but better is a bad thing, because in my opinion it's not. It's just the other thrusters are only a bad... The more powerful thrusters are only a bad thing in a situation where you have the thrusters already at your disposal, because you're always going to pick the better one. I mean, imagine a hydrogen thruster that has like 4 times the fuel efficiency of these thrusters and produces twice as much thrust. 4 times the fuel efficiency, twice as much thrust, but it requires like these Prototech components that can only be harvested by harvesting Prototech pieces or Prototech panels or whatever. Then having a super efficient, more powerful hydrogen thruster that cuts this 6 stack down to a 3 stack is suddenly so much more viable. But, I mean, you could have it say, oh, well, it burns 1 block further because the thrust... because it has like a narrower or more powerful thrust vector. So I have to disagree with that argument.
Not only super boring, it also takes away that problem-solving and decision-making aspect.
Except it doesn't. It's not boring, and it doesn't take away that problem-solving. aspect, because again, you're not actually able to just slap them on if they require a newer component, or if they require more components than the standard one. You can have better thrusters at higher cost. This is the one thing Space Engineers doesn't have in its progression system. It doesn't have a reason to progress. It doesn't have a reason to use an industrial thruster. It doesn't give you a reason to use a warfare ion thruster. They are purely there for aesthetics. That's it. They look cool. So there's really no viable difference between them. It's just a thing. But if, say the warfare thruster was able to output more thrust per capita than the standard thruster, than the standard ion thruster, but at the cost that it requires more steel plates because it's better armored, and requires more thruster components to channel that thrust into a more powerful thrust. That would make the warfare thrusters a better choice, but in traditional playthroughs, then you would still have to develop. They would basically be more cost intensive to use the warfare thrusters, so you would have to establish a better base of operations to use them first, and have access to more resources. So it would be the penalty of more for less. Are you getting more by using these blocks, or less by using these blocks?
To Space Engineers, instead making it all about which thruster has the bigger numbers. It's like with the weapons in the game. All of the weapons in the game have their own unique use. Except for rockets, they suck. But no weapon is definitively the best weapon, and I think that should be the same for thrusters. Luckily, it looks like this new block, the Prototech Large Ion Thruster, does not fall into that problem, because quite simply, it's huge. Just look at the scale of this thruster compared to that little guy down there. It's at least twice the height and width of the current Large Ion Thruster, and it's much, much longer. Players of Space Engineers have spent years asking for larger thrusters to move their massive ships, and it seems like Keen are finally delivering on that. I won't lie, I'm very excited for these, especially as they give me a kind of Star Trek nacelle vibe. Just me? Obviously the trade-off for these is that they are absolutely massive, but it'll be interesting to see what other requirements they have to be built. Or maybe you can't build them at all. If you go back to our teaser, fully operational item redacted seems to suggest to me that a fully complete Prototech block is available to be found at the location described. Maybe you cannot build the Prototech blocks and instead have to find them out in the solar system and merge them onto your ships. If that is the case, I'd personally be very on board with that idea, as it would not only improve the rarity of these items, but also it completely circumvents my concerns from before about them being straight up replacements for normal thrusters.
Again, you only have this pick the one with the biggest number problem if you are limiting them to the exact same resources. If one costs more, then they're less likely to use it until they have more resources to install it. This is why I don't like these kind of arguments, because on the main hand, it's like, this is common sense, and it makes perfect sense to anyone who understands how progression works. On the other hand, it introduces the new issue of big numbers better when you're playing in creative. So you're always going to pick the one with the biggest number. Well, the thing is, we have modded thrusters. Modded thrusters are literally just thrusters with bigger numbers. So the entire argument becomes completely invalid because Keen Software has literally given us the option to say big numbers are better, and to use thrusters that use bigger numbers. The thing is, they are the ones limiting themselves by not including thrusters with big numbers. Because as of now, the thrusters they have in game require hundreds to move a ship of a certain size. I mean, just look at the thruster bank on this. This is way, way too cost intensive. And you get almost nothing of value from this, other than it moves the object. Plus, this is a lot of PCU. And each one is an independent block, so you have a lot of PCU being used up to put this many thrusters just to move your giant hangar. And then you've got to have the exact same number of thrusters on the other side of this thing. So these kind of massive thruster banks are both an advantage and a disadvantage. Also, another thing this person doesn't bring up is the fact that with the more advanced thrusters and reducing the number of thrusters, it takes far fewer shots from any weapon to disable those thrusters and makes it easier to neutralize your entire ship. So it becomes a question of, do you want more thrusters and thus more redundancy to keep you functional, or do you want less thrusters with more power but risk having someone take them out easier? So it is, in fact, a question of how are you planning to build this thing? And I think this is something that this player has kind of missed when they're building their own creations, at least as a concept. Because their argument focuses only on big numbers bad. That's not an argument. It's the amount of investment to get those big numbers. If you invest nothing and just get big numbers, then that's bad, because that basically takes away any kind of fun in the game. But if it takes investment and resources and plotting and planning and harvesting to get to the point where you can use those thrusters with big numbers, or those weapons with big numbers, or anything with big numbers, then yeah, suddenly having them is a good thing that improves the overall quality of the game.
Thrusters. During the announcement livestream for the Signals update, the developers said 2024 is the year of PvE in Space Engineers, and that the next update will be about space and planetary encounters. These are the things that Space Engineers is needed for the longest time, because quite simply, what is the point of building a ship if there isn't a reason to use them? You start on a planet, you basically build a ship and fly to space, and you're done. There isn't really anything to do after that. Exploration gives players a reason to keep playing the game, past their initial building of a spaceship, and PvE will add extra spice along your journey to your goals. If we go back to our...
Now, another thing I'd like to bring up about PvE, I'm honestly hoping that the developers introduce a wheel control computer to their AI system, so that way you can make wheeled vehicles that don't require thrusters to operate. Because they've got the wheels, they've got the AI controller, but the AI controllers cannot use the wheels. They have to have the friction reduced to zero and have thrusters installed in order to operate. And I find that kind of sad, because it inhibits what you can build in terms of forces. So, like I says, I built a bunch, and I do mean a bunch of different types of tank. And it would be nice if the wheel controller could operate either one of two ways. Honestly, I'd almost like two of them. A custom wheel controller that allows you to use rotors and maybe even hinges. Mostly rotors. Actually, I think I just want one that operates with rotors. Either the advanced or regular rotor, or large or small, that basically if you have a rotor and you attach a wheel to it, it turns it into a suspension block and gives you all the functionality of a suspension block. And you can do this to multiple wheels. I mean, honestly, you could say you want to put a hinge on it to make it turn. Or honestly, I'd almost prefer tank steering as a option. So maybe about 3 different kinds of controllers. A wheel controller that allows you to do... Well, actually 2. A wheel